The little black girl grabbed the biker beside the dusty motel, claiming a truck had trailed her since dawn. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. It was a dusty afternoon in a small town in the middle of nowhere. The kind of town where the air always smells of dry earth, and the heat from the sun beats down relentlessly, making everything shimmer like a mirage. The trucks that pass through kick up clouds of dirt, and the few motels that line the road are nothing more than faded, forgotten structures, their neon signs flickering in the relentless sun. One of these motels, the kind that looked like it belonged in an old Western movie, was where a moment of desperation was about to unfold. As the sun began to dip lower into the horizon, casting long shadows over the empty street, a little girl appeared, running from the darkness that had been trailing her all day. She was small, maybe no older than 9, with braided hair that whipped behind her as she sprinted down the road barefoot, her dress torn and covered in dust. She was crying, tears streaking down her dirt-smeared face, her body trembling with fear. Her chest rose and fell rapidly as she gasped for breath, her heart pounding in her chest from both the fear and the physical exhaustion of her desperate flight. She didn't know where to go, but she knew she had to keep running. The truck had been behind her since dawn. She had tried everything to lose it, taking turns down narrow side streets, darting between alleyways, but the truck followed her, relentless and unyielding. As she reached the edge of the dusty motel parking lot, her legs nearly gave out from the sheer exhaustion, but she kept running, her eyes scanning the area for anyone who could help. She spotted a group of bikers standing near their motorcycles, talking amongst themselves. Without thinking, she rushed toward them, her fear overriding her hesitation. As she approached, her eyes locked on one of the bikers, a tall man with a weathered face and a leather vest, his back turned to her. She ran straight up to him and grabbed onto the sleeve of his jacket, pulling at him desperately. "Please help me," she sobbed, her voice shaking. "They've been following me. They won't stop." The biker turned slowly, sensing the urgency in her voice. He looked down at her, his expression hardening as he saw the fear in her wide, brown eyes. He wasn't a man who typically got involved in situations like this. Bikers weren't supposed to get wrapped up in other people's problems. But something about the girl's desperation, the way she clung to his jacket, made something inside him stir. He could see she wasn't lying. The fear in her eyes was real, and that was enough to make him make a decision he never expected to make. Without a word, he motioned for the rest of the group to gather around. He could see the truck in the distance, its headlights coming closer, but the girl had already said it had been chasing her for hours. They didn't have much time. The group quickly moved into action, their voices low and urgent as they discussed what to do. The bikers knew they couldn't just let the truck drive off with the girl, but they also knew the risks of getting involved in something like this. They weren't law enforcement. They weren't even supposed to care. But this wasn't just any girl. This was a child in need, and in their world, that was enough to make them step up and do whatever it took to protect her. The leader of the group, the same man the girl had grabbed, looked at his crew, his expression set. "We don't leave anyone behind," he said. And just like that, the decision was made. They were going to stop that truck, no matter what it took. As they mounted their bikes, ready to chase down the threat that was stalking this innocent child, the sound of their engines roaring to life filled the night air. The girl, still clutching the biker's sleeve, could finally breathe a little easier. She wasn't alone anymore. They were going to help her. She just had to hold on a little longer. As the roar of the motorcycles echoed through the still night air, the group of bikers moved with a sense of urgency. The little girl, still clutching the sleeve of the biker beside her, could hear the engine growl behind them as they sped off down the road. The heavy sound of tires grinding against the rough pavement seemed to drown out everything else. It was like time had slowed, and all that mattered was reaching the truck before it could do any more harm. The biker leader, the man she had grabbed in desperation, glanced back at her, his expression grim. She looked so small, so fragile, and yet there was a fire in her eyes, a determination that matched his own. He could feel the weight of her trust on his shoulders. He wouldn't let her down. He couldn't. The wind was harsh, tugging at their leather jackets as they tore through the empty highway. The group of bikers, their faces hidden behind their helmets, communicated without words. They had been through countless rides, through battles fought in the streets and on the road, but this was different. This wasn't just about riding. This was about protecting a child. This was personal. The truck was still behind them, following relentlessly. The headlights had been far behind when they first took off, but now, as they glanced back, they could see the truck gaining speed. It wasn't just following, it was closing in. The group of bikers turned onto a smaller road that ran parallel to the highway, the tires screeching as they veered sharply to the right. The road was rougher here, more treacherous, but it was the only way to shake the truck off. They needed to make the truck think they were heading in one direction while they quickly rerouted to catch it off guard. The girl squeezed the biker's sleeve tighter, her grip like a vice. Her voice was barely audible over the sound of the engines as she whispered, "Please don't let them take me. I don't know what they want, but I'm scared." The biker's heart clenched at the words. He didn't know the full story yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to let anyone take this child. The truck was now just a few yards behind them, the sound of its engine deafening. The leader of the bikers, his eyes focused on the road ahead, spoke into the intercom system, his voice calm but determined. "We've got to get ahead of them. All teams, move out. Stay close, but keep your distance. We don't know what we're dealing with yet." His words cut through the tension like a knife. They had no idea who was in that truck or why they were chasing the girl, but they weren't about to let her face it alone. The leader's bike surged forward, the engine roaring as he pushed the throttle. The others followed suit, the convoy speeding through the night, their bikes cutting through the air with precision. The truck followed, the headlights blazing like a predator on the hunt. A few minutes later, they spotted it, the truck still behind them, but they were about to turn the tables. The leader signaled for the group to stop. In a synchronized move, the bikers slammed on their brakes, the sound of the tires screeching as they came to a halt. The truck, now too close, didn't have time to react. It swerved to avoid the bikes, but it was too late. The truck veered off the road and into a ditch. The bikers jumped off their bikes in an instant, surrounding the truck like a wall. The leader, his face hard and unforgiving, walked toward the vehicle, his boots crunching the gravel beneath him. He could feel the girl's eyes on him, still clutching his sleeve. She was safe, for now, but he knew they had to make sure this was over. He knocked on the window of the truck, his voice low but commanding. "Get out." The truck door opened slowly, revealing a man in his mid-30s, his face pale and sweating. His eyes darted around nervously as he saw the group of bikers surrounding him. The leader stepped closer, his voice colder than before. "What do you want with this girl?" The man hesitated, his lips trembling. "She's just a runaway," he muttered, but the fear in his voice was undeniable. The leader didn't buy it. He glanced back at the girl, who was now standing beside him, her hands clasped in front of her. She nodded once, confirming his suspicions. This wasn't some random chase. This was something much darker. "She's not going anywhere with you," the leader said firmly. The man opened his mouth to protest, but the biker's hand shot out, gripping his collar and yanking him from the truck. The rest of the bikers moved in, surrounding the man and ensuring he wouldn't escape. The leader turned to the girl, his voice softening just for a moment. "You're safe now. You don't have to worry about him anymore." The girl's face, still streaked with tears, softened. She nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. It wasn't over yet, but she had found the protection she needed. And with the bikers standing beside her, she knew that no one could hurt her again. The situation had shifted from a desperate chase to something that felt like a standoff. The truck, now stuck in the ditch, had become an afterthought. The group of bikers surrounded it, blocking the man from escaping, while the little girl stood beside their leader, still trembling but now somewhat calmer. She had come to them for help, and they had acted without hesitation. But the problem was far from over. The leader of the bikers, his face hard and determined, motioned for his crew to keep watch. He could see the man in the truck squirming, still trying to figure out how to weasel his way out of this. But there was no way he was going to walk away from this unscathed. The leader bent down and looked the girl in the eyes, his voice softening for the first time since they had taken off. "You're safe now," he said, "but we need to find out who he really is and why he's after you." The girl, wiping away the last of her tears, nodded. "He's not the first one," she whispered, her voice shaky. There's been others. They just keep following me. Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. The leader's eyes narrowed, and he turned to the other bikers. They were all listening intently, and the tension was palpable. The girl wasn't just a runaway. There was something much more sinister happening here, and it was becoming clear that the group had just scratched the surface of a much larger problem. What do you mean, others? One of the bikers asked, his voice low and concerned. The girl hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. There were two men. They came after me when I was at the diner. They kept watching me. I tried to run, but they always found me. The leader's fists clenched at his sides. This wasn't just some random kidnapping attempt. It was organized. We need to get to the bottom of this, he said, his voice cold and resolute. We'll take care of him first. Then, we figure out who else is behind this and why. The leader turned to the biker who had been keeping an eye on the man in the truck. Is he talking? Is he going to tell us who's really behind this? The biker shook his head. No, he's too scared to say anything. But there's something off about him. He's not a regular guy, that's for sure. The leader stood up, his gaze fixed on the man still sitting in the truck. We'll find out soon enough, he muttered. If he doesn't want to talk, we'll make him. The girl, who had been standing quietly, watching everything unfold, finally spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. Please don't hurt him. I just want to be safe. The leader turned and looked at her, his expression softening. We're not going to hurt him, he said, his voice calm but firm. But we can't let him go until we know the truth. He motioned to the rest of the bikers. We'll take him back to the motel and hold him there until we get some answers. No one is leaving until we figure out what's going on. The bikers quickly moved into action, securing the man from the truck and bringing him back to the motel. The girl followed them, still holding onto the leader's jacket sleeve. As they reached the motel, the sound of their motorcycles seemed to echo in the stillness of the night, a reminder that the bikers had made their presence known. The leader glanced back at the girl, who was now walking beside him, her footsteps slow and uncertain. He could tell she was still scared, but at least she wasn't alone anymore. They reached the motel's small, rundown office, and the leader motioned for everyone to stop. We'll keep him in the back room. No one else comes in or out until we know what's going on, he said, his voice unwavering. The bikers filed in behind him, securing the man in the small room while the leader stepped outside for a moment. The cool night air hit his face, and he took a deep breath, his mind racing. This wasn't just a random kidnapping attempt. Someone had been watching the girl, stalking her. But why? Who was behind this, and what did they want with her? The answers weren't coming quickly, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going to stop until the girl was safe. And whoever was behind this was going to regret ever laying a hand on her. As he stood there in the dim light of the motel parking lot, his mind shifted between the girl's fear and the cold, determined look in her eyes. She wasn't just a victim. She was a survivor. And the bikers would make sure it stayed that way. The night seemed to stretch on forever. The small motel room was quiet, save for the occasional rustling of a biker adjusting their position or the faint hum of motorcycles idling outside. Inside, the leader of the bikers stood by the door of the room where the man from the truck was being held. The girl had been given a seat in the corner, her legs pulled up to her chest, still holding onto the leader's jacket sleeve. He could see the anxiety in her eyes, the lingering fear, but also something else, a glimmer of trust. She was safe for the moment, but the man they had captured still hadn't spoken. The biker leader's patience was running thin. He had seen this type before, someone with something to hide. Someone who wouldn't break easily. But he wasn't going to let the man walk away without answers. He turned to one of his men, the biggest of the group, a mountain of a man known as Diesel. Stay with the girl. Keep her calm, he said, his voice low and steady. Diesel nodded, his giant frame blocking most of the doorway as he stepped inside the room where the girl was sitting. The leader motioned for the rest of the crew to follow him. They had one task now, to get the man to talk. The leader entered the back room where the man from the truck was being held. The man was sitting on a folding chair, his hands bound tightly behind his back. His eyes darted nervously as the leader walked in, followed by a few other bikers, including the one who had been keeping watch earlier. You need to talk, the leader said, his voice calm but firm. And you're going to tell me who's behind this. The man didn't respond. Instead, he shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly trying to find a way out. You're wasting your time, the the man muttered, his voice hoarse. The leader leaned in closer, his gaze never leaving the man's face. I don't think you understand, he said. You're not walking away from this. So you can either tell me what I want to know now, or I can make you talk. Your choice. The man swallowed hard, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked around the room as if searching for an escape, but the bikers surrounding him made that impossible. I don't know who they are, the man said suddenly, his voice trembling. I'm just the one they send to do the dirty work. I don't know their names. I just do what I'm told. The leader's jaw tightened, but he remained composed. Who are these people? Why are they after that girl? The man's eyes flickered toward the door where the girl was waiting. He hesitated, then spoke in a low, almost inaudible voice. They were hired to bring her in. Someone higher up is pulling the strings. The leader's mind raced as he processed the information. Who hired them? He demanded. I don't know, the man replied quickly, his voice shaking with fear. I never met the person who hired us. We were just told to keep an eye on her. Get her to come with us, no questions asked. The leader took a deep breath, frustration building inside him. This wasn't enough. He needed more. How long has this been going on? He asked, his voice low but piercing. The man squirmed in his seat. A few months, he said reluctantly. We started following her a couple of months ago. But this time was different. The leader narrowed his eyes. What do you mean, different? The man glanced at the door again, his eyes darting nervously. They knew she would try to run, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They knew she would be scared enough to run. That's why they sent me. They knew I could get her. And they were right. She didn't stand a chance. The leader felt a cold rage building inside him. He wanted answers. He wanted the people responsible for this to pay. But he wasn't going to let his emotions cloud his judgment. Not yet. Who else is involved? The leader pressed. The man shook his head, his eyes wide with fear. I told you I don't know. I just do what I'm told. The leader stood up straight, his hands clenched into fists. This wasn't the first time they had come across a situation like this. Someone trying to abduct an innocent person for reasons they couldn't understand. But this time was different. The girl wasn't just any victim. She was someone who had been followed for months, someone who had been targeted for reasons they still didn't fully understand. And they were going to find out why. The leader looked at the man one last time. You're going to stay here until we figure this out, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. If you want to walk away from this, you'd better start talking. Otherwise, you'll stay here until we get the truth. The man's eyes flickered with fear as he nodded. The leader turned and walked out of the room, his mind still racing. The next steps were clear. They had to find the people behind this. They had to make them pay for what they'd done to the girl. But the real question was, who was behind all of this? And why had they chosen her? The leader knew they were getting closer to the answers, but the road ahead was still shrouded in darkness. The leader of the bikers stood outside the motel room, his mind racing with thoughts of everything the man had just told him. The girl, still sitting in the corner, looked up at him, her eyes full of uncertainty and fear. He could see the trust she had placed in him, and it weighed heavily on his shoulders. He couldn't fail her. He knew they were getting closer to the truth, but there was still so much they didn't understand. Who was behind this? Why was she being targeted? The questions circled in his mind like vultures, waiting for answers. He turned to his crew, the faces of the bikers looking back at him with a mixture of concern and determination. We need to find the people behind this, he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. The man in there isn't going to give us anything useful, but someone else will. We just need to track them down. The bikers nodded in unison. They all knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about stopping a kidnapping. It was about finding the truth and ensuring the girl's safety. The leader turned back to the motel room where the man was being held. He walked in, his boots clicking against the floor. We're done playing games, he said, his voice cold as ice. You're going to help us, or you're going to regret it. The man, who had been nervously shifting in his chair, flinched at the words. He had known the bikers were tough, but now it was clear they meant business. The leader leaned in close, his face inches from the man's. Tell me everything you know, he growled. The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting around the room. I told you, I don't know anything, he muttered, his voice shaky. I'm just the one they sent. I don't know the big boss. The leader's patience was running thin. He grabbed the man by the collar and pulled him up from his chair. You think I'm going to let you walk out of here without talking? He said, his voice low and threatening. You're not getting away. Not this time. The man's eyes widened with fear, but before he could speak, the sound of a motorcycle revving outside broke the silence. The leader released the man and walked to the window. He saw the familiar figure of one of his crew members, Storm, pulling up to the motel. Storm was a tracker, one of the best. He had a reputation for finding people no matter where they hid. The leader's pulse quickened as Storm parked his bike and walked toward the motel. "What did you find?" the leader asked, his voice urgent. Storm didn't say anything at first. He looked over at the man in the room, then back at the leader. "You were right," he said quietly. "They've been following her for months. I traced their route. There's someone else involved, someone bigger." The leader's heart raced. This was what he had been waiting for. They were getting closer. "Who is it?" he demanded. "I'm still working on that," Storm replied. "But there's a pattern to their movements. They've been using different vehicles, but they've all come from the same direction. It's a place called Redwood Ridge. That's where they're based." The leader's mind raced. Redwood Ridge. He had heard the name before. It was a small, remote area outside of town, known for its dense forest and desolate roads. If that's where the people behind this were hiding, then they were running out of time. "We need to move," the leader said, turning to his crew. "We're going to Redwood Ridge. Now." He turned to the man in the room, who had been listening to the conversation with growing anxiety. "You're coming with us," the leader said. "If you know anything about Redwood Ridge, now's the time to speak up." The man opened his mouth, but the leader silenced him with a look. "If you're not going to help, then you're not going anywhere." The bikers quickly gathered their things and prepared to leave. The girl, still sitting in the corner, looked up at the leader. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked, her voice small and filled with fear. The leader knelt down in front of her, his expression softening. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll take care of this. You're safe now." The girl nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. But there was still one thing she couldn't shake, the fear that the people after her weren't done yet. As they mounted their bikes and prepared to leave the motel, the leader looked back one last time at the small room. They had come this far, but they weren't done. Not yet. They were going to Redwood Ridge to find the answers, and no matter what it took, they were going to put an end to this. The engines roared to life as the group of bikers sped off into the night, the weight of their mission heavy on their shoulders. The girl sat behind the leader, clutching him tightly, her heart racing as they headed toward the unknown. The journey was just beginning. The ride to Redwood Ridge felt longer than it should have. The sun had set hours ago, and the moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the group of bikers as they sped down the winding roads. The wind howled through the trees, and the smell of pine and dirt filled the air. The girl, clutching tightly to the leader of the bikers, felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the cold night air, it was the fear of what lay ahead. She had been running from something for months, and now, as they neared their destination, she couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to escalate in ways she couldn't control. The leader, feeling her tense grip on his waist, glanced back over his shoulder at her. "We're almost there," he said, his voice steady, though his mind was racing. He didn't like the uncertainty of it all. They were heading into unfamiliar territory, to a place that smelled like danger. But he had made a promise to protect her, and he would keep that promise no matter what. "Stay close," he added, making sure she could hear him over the roar of the engine. She nodded, though he could still feel the fear in her. The rest of the bikers followed behind, their engines roaring like thunder in the quiet night, their formation tight and coordinated. They had no idea what they were going to find in Redwood Ridge, but they knew one thing for sure. The people behind this were dangerous. The further they rode, the more isolated they became. The roads grew narrower, and the trees seemed to close in around them, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow them whole. The leader's senses were on high alert. Every rustling leaf, every crack of a twig under the tires felt amplified in the silence of the woods. As they entered the outskirts of Redwood Ridge, a small, forgotten town hidden deep in the mountains, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if the town itself was hiding secrets it wasn't ready to share. The leader slowed his bike as they passed a few rundown buildings, the windows dark, the streets eerily empty. It didn't look like the type of place that welcomed outsiders, but that was exactly why they had come. They needed answers, and Redwood Ridge was the key. They stopped in front of an old, dilapidated building, a warehouse of sorts, with broken windows and rusted metal doors. The leader dismounted, his boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. He turned to the girl, who had dismounted behind him, looking up at the building with wide, uncertain eyes. "Stay close," he said, his voice firm but gentle. She nodded again, though she didn't speak. The tension in her body was palpable. She was scared. She had every right to be. But this was it. They had made it this far, and there was no turning back. The leader motioned for the rest of the bikers to follow as they walked toward the entrance of the warehouse. The silence was deafening, the only sound the crunch of gravel underfoot. The building loomed over them like a dark, intimidating shadow, its broken windows reflecting the moonlight like empty eyes watching them. As they approached the entrance, the leader glanced back at his crew. They were all ready. He could see it in their eyes. They weren't afraid. They had come this far for one reason: to protect the girl, and to stop whoever was behind this from causing any more harm. The leader reached for the rusted door handle, feeling the weight of the moment. They were about to find out what was really going on in Redwood Ridge, and who was behind everything that had happened to the girl. With one swift motion, he pulled open the door, the hinges creaking loudly as the door swung wide. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The room was vast, the shadows cast by the dim light making it difficult to see clearly. But they could hear something: voices. Quiet, hushed voices. The leaders signaled for the group to move in silently, their steps light as they approached the source of the sound. As they moved deeper into the building, the voices grew louder, clearer. The leader's heart began to race as he realized who they were. He recognized one of the voices. He had heard it before. It was the man they had captured earlier, the one who had tried to run when they stopped him. He was speaking to someone else now, someone with an authority in their voice that sent a shiver down the leader's spine. "I told you, I can't get her. They're onto us," the man said. "We need to make a new plan." The leader's blood ran cold. He motioned for his crew to stop. They were close now, close enough to hear everything. "The bikers are here," the man continued. "They've got the girl. We can't keep this up much longer. We have to move fast." The leader clenched his jaw. He knew they were talking about the girl. Whoever these people were, they weren't going to stop until they had her. But they had underestimated the bikers. The leader was ready. "Stay here," he whispered to his crew. "We're going to make sure this ends tonight." He moved forward, his footsteps silent as he closed in on the voices. He needed to find out everything. He needed to make sure that the girl would never have to run again. As he crept closer to the shadows, the voices continued, unaware of the approaching danger. The leader knew the time had come to take action. They had found the enemy. Now, it was time to stop them for good. The tension in the air was thick, and every step the leader took seemed to echo louder in the silence of the old warehouse. The bikers had gathered in a tight formation, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. The voices they had been tracking were just ahead, but the leader knew they needed to be careful. This wasn't just a simple rescue mission anymore. It had turned into something much darker. The girl, still clutching his jacket as they moved deeper into the building, felt her pulse quicken with every step. She had been running for so long, terrified of what might happen next, but now she felt an odd sense of calm. She trusted these men, these bikers, who had promised to keep her safe. They had already risked everything to protect her, and she knew they weren't about to stop now. The leader motioned for the crew to stop as they neared a set of wooden crates, stacked high and casting deep shadows in the dim light. The voices grew louder now, clear enough for him to hear the words distinctly. He stepped closer, his breathing steady, his eyes focused on the area where the voices seemed to be coming from. It was clear they were talking about the girl. He could hear fragments of their conversation, and the more he listened, the more the pieces of the puzzle started to fall into place. "She's the one we need," one of the voices said. "We get her, we have everything." The leader's heart raced, and a cold anger washed over him. These people didn't even know who they were dealing with. They were about to find out. He signaled to his crew, and in a coordinated movement, they spread out, silently taking their positions. The leader peeked around the corner, his eyes narrowing as he spotted two men talking in low voices. One of them was the same man they had captured earlier, still looking shaken but defiant. The other man was tall, wearing a dark coat, and had a sinister look in his eyes, someone who didn't belong here. "We're getting close," the tall man said. "They won't be able to stop us." The leader's stomach churned. He had heard enough. It was time to act. Without warning, he stepped forward, his voice breaking the tense silence. "You've made a huge mistake," he said, his voice loud and clear. The two men froze, turning quickly as they saw the bikers emerge from the shadows, their faces hard and determined. The leader stepped forward, his eyes locked on the tall man. "You're not taking her," he growled. The tall man smirked, stepping back. "You think you can stop us?" he sneered. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." The leader didn't flinch. "I know exactly who you are," he said. "And you've messed with the wrong people." The bikers closed in, surrounding the two men, but the leader's attention remained focused on the girl. He could see her fears starting to rise again, but she didn't move, standing strong beside him. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft but firm. The girl nodded, her face pale but determined. "I'm okay," she whispered, her grip tightening on his jacket. "I trust you." The leader smiled reassuringly at her before turning his gaze back to the men who had been hunting her. The tension in the air was thick, the weight of the moment hanging heavily around them. It was clear the men hadn't expected the bikers to be this organized, this ready to fight for the girl's safety. The tall man took a step back, glancing at his partner. "This isn't over," he muttered. "You'll regret this." The leader didn't flinch. "No, you will," he said, his voice hard with finality. The bikers tightened their circle, not allowing the men to move. "This is your last warning," the leader continued, his eyes narrowing. "If you don't tell us everything we want to know right now, it's over for you." The man hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between the bikers, but then he sighed in resignation. "Fine," he muttered, his voice defeated. "It's not just about her. It's about what she knows. They think she has something they need." The leader's mind raced. What did the girl know? Why were they after her? "What is it?" the leader demanded, stepping closer. "What does she know?" The man hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice trembling. "I don't know all the details," he said, "but they think she's the key to something big, something they can use to change everything." The leader's mind spun as he processed the information. Whoever was behind this wasn't just after the girl. There was something else at play here, and he was going to find out what it was. "Who's behind this?" the leader pressed. The man didn't respond right away, but after a long moment of silence, he spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Syndicate," he said. "They're pulling the strings, and they won't stop until they get what they want." The leader's heart skipped a beat. The Syndicate? That name sent a chill down his spine. He had heard rumors about them, whispers of a powerful underground network that controlled everything from politics to crime. But he never imagined they would be involved in something like this. The leader turned to his crew, his mind already racing with the next steps. They had just learned a crucial piece of the puzzle. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. They still had to find out why the girl was so important to the Syndicate, and how they could stop them before it was too late. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice firm. "The real fight starts now." The bikers, their faces grim, nodded in agreement. This was only the beginning. They had a new mission, and they were going to see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The leader stood motionless, his mind processing the revelation. The Syndicate. Those two words echoed in his thoughts, sending a chill through his body. He had heard rumors, but he never thought he would actually be up against them. The underground network that controlled everything from politics to crime, pulling strings behind the scenes, was not something to take lightly. The Syndicate was powerful, ruthless, and, most terrifying of all, they were organized. The man they had captured in the warehouse was just a pawn in their game, and the girl, who had been at the center of all this chaos, was somehow the key to everything. He turned to the group of bikers, their faces a mix of determination and concern. "We're not backing down," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "We have to move fast. The Syndicate isn't going to stop until they get what they want." His crew nodded in unison, the resolve in their eyes clear. They had already come this far, and they weren't about to turn back. But the question remained. How were they going to take down an organization that was so far-reaching? "We need to find their base of operations," the leader continued, his eyes narrowing. "We need to hit them where it hurts." Diesel, the giant of the group, stepped forward, his fists clenched in readiness. "I can track them," he said. "If we can find one of their members, we'll follow the trail." The leader nodded. Diesel was their best tracker. He had found people in the most remote places, and he wasn't about to let the Syndicate slip away. "Get ready," the leader ordered. We're not wasting any time. We move at dawn. The night passed slowly as they prepared for the next phase. The leader spent hours going over the information they had gathered, trying to piece together a plan. The syndicate was elusive, but they couldn't afford to waste time. Every minute that passed brought them closer to danger. The next morning, the group geared up and headed out. The girl, though still shaken, was more determined than ever. She had found safety in the bikers, and she wasn't going to let fear stop her from fighting back. The leader could see the change in her. She wasn't the scared little girl they had met weeks ago. She was becoming someone stronger, someone who could take on the world if necessary. As the group sped through the winding roads toward their destination, the leader's mind was focused. They had no idea what they would find when they reached the heart of the Syndicate's operations, but they were ready for whatever came next. They were going to put an end to this. The journey took them through the outskirts of the city, and then into a series of back roads, unfamiliar territory where the Syndicate could be hiding. Diesel kept his eyes peeled, his sharp instincts guiding them. We're close, Diesel said, his voice tense over the comms. There's a warehouse up ahead. I think we've found their base. The leader's grip tightened on his handlebars. This was it. They were finally closing in on the people who had made this girl's life a nightmare. As they approached the warehouse, the leader signaled for the group to stop. He looked at the crew, his voice calm but commanding. This is it, he said. We go in fast and hard. No hesitation. We take them down. The bikers nodded, their faces set in grim determination. They had faced danger before, but this was different. The Syndicate wasn't just a gang. They were a force to be reckoned with. The leader's eyes flicked to the girl, who was now standing beside him. Her face was pale, but there was a fire in her eyes. She wasn't backing down, and neither were they. You're not alone, the leader said softly to her. We're going to make sure this ends today. She gave him a small nod, her resolve matching his. Together, they walked toward the entrance of the warehouse, their footsteps steady and sure. The air felt heavier now, the tension thick as they approached the door. The leader motioned for the crew to get into position, and they spread out, preparing to breach the building. As they entered, the sound of their footsteps was drowned out by the low hum of machinery and the soft murmur of voices in the distance. The leader signaled for everyone to be quiet as they moved deeper into the warehouse. The place was massive, filled with crates and metal shelves stacked high, casting long shadows across the cold concrete floor. They moved carefully, not wanting to alert anyone inside. The leader's eyes darted around, scanning every corner for any sign of movement. Then, they heard it, a door creaking open in the distance. The leader motioned for the crew to hold their positions as they listened closely. He could hear muffled voices now, arguing about something. He knew this was their chance. The group moved swiftly, closing in on the source of the noise. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves face to face with a group of men, members of the Syndicate. The leader didn't hesitate. This is the end of the road. For you, he said, his voice cold and filled with authority. The men froze, their eyes widening in shock as they realized they were surrounded. The leader stepped forward, his fists clenched. You're done. The fight for the girl's freedom had just begun. The confrontation was inevitable, and it was happening now. The Syndicate members stood frozen for just a moment, their eyes scanning the bikers who had surrounded them. There was no doubt in the air. This was a battle they weren't prepared for. The leader of the bikers stepped forward, his voice cold and determined. This ends now, he said, his eyes locking onto the men. You're not going to take her or anyone else. Not today. The Syndicate members exchanged nervous glances, realizing they were trapped. There was no escape now. The leader's voice rang out again. We've got your number. No more games. You're going to answer for everything. One of the men, a tall figure wearing a leather jacket, sneered and stepped forward, his hands raised in mock surrender. You really think you can stop us? He said, his voice dripping with arrogance. We're the Syndicate. You're just a bunch of bikers. The leader didn't flinch. You underestimate us, he replied, his voice low but filled with conviction. You've been stalking the wrong people. Without another word, the leader made a quick motion, signaling his crew to close in. The room was tense, every biker's hand instinctively on their weapons, but they held back. This was not about killing. This was about getting answers. The leader's eyes moved over the group, his gaze briefly landing on the girl. She was still there, standing behind him, though her fear had begun to turn into something else. She was no longer the frightened child who had first run to the bikers for help. She had grown stronger in these past few days, and it showed in the way she stood, her hands clenched but not trembling. "I'll tell you this once," the leader continued, his voice unwavering. "You're either going to talk, or you're going to find out what happens when you don't." The man in the leather jacket took a step back, his confidence wavering. "We're not the ones you should be worrying about," he muttered, almost to himself. "You don't understand. The Syndicate is everywhere." His words hung in the air like a warning, but the leader was undeterred. "I've been in worse places than this," he said firmly. "And I've dealt with worse people than you. You're not getting away. Not this time." The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. The man who had been trying to act tough, now visibly nervous, looked at the other Syndicate members, hoping one of them would say something. But they all remained silent, their eyes darting between the bikers. The leader stepped closer to the man in the leather jacket, his presence imposing. "Last chance," he growled. "Tell me what's going on, or we'll make you talk." The man looked around, his face twisted in fear. He could see the bikers weren't bluffing. This wasn't a game. And in that moment, the fear in his eyes was clear. "You don't know what you're getting into," the man finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "The Syndicate is bigger than you think. They're everywhere. They have eyes everywhere. If you think you can stop us, you're wrong." The leader's fists clenched, but he stayed calm. "You're wrong," he said coldly. "I've fought people like you before. We'll take you down, one way or another." The man seemed to weigh his options, but it was clear he was starting to crack. "I don't know everything," he stammered, his voice trembling. "But I know enough. They've been looking for the girl for months. They think she has something important. If they get their hands on her." His words trailed off, his face growing paler by the second. The leader pressed harder. "What does she have? What do they want from her?" The man looked at the girl, his eyes widening with recognition, but fear quickly replaced it. "I don't know," he said quickly. "They told me she's the key to something big, something they need to complete their plan. But I swear, I don't know what it is." The leader's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. The Syndicate had been after the girl for months. They had been watching her, following her, waiting for the right moment to take her. But what was it that made her so important? The leader glanced back at the girl, whose face had grown pale. She was still standing behind him, but now, her fear had returned. "What do they want with me?" she whispered. The leader turned to her, his voice soft but filled with reassurance. "We're going to figure this out. You're not alone anymore. They're not going to take you." The girl nodded, her face determined but still filled with uncertainty. The leader turned back to the man, his voice hard. "You're going to tell us everything you know. And if you don't, we'll make sure the Syndicate knows who they're messing with." The man looked at the bikers surrounding him and then back at the leader, his shoulders sagging in defeat. "Fine," he muttered. "I'll tell you what I know." The leader leaned in, ready to hear what he had to say. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment that would reveal everything about the Syndicate's plan and why they were after the girl. The truth was closer than ever, and the leader was ready to do whatever it took to stop them. The man, visibly broken by the pressure, took a shaky breath before speaking. They think she's the key to unlocking a weapon," he said, his voice quivering. "A weapon that could change everything." The leader of the bikers stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of weapon?" he demanded. The man swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously to the girl, who was standing silently behind the leader. "I don't know all the details. But what I do know is that it's something the Syndicate has been after for years. They believe she's the one who can unlock it." The leader's heart raced, but he kept his cool. "What exactly does she have that can help them?" The man hesitated, clearly afraid, but he knew there was no going back now. "It's some sort of code, a set of instructions or coordinates. Something that, if activated, could give the Syndicate control over weapons, technology, even entire cities. I don't know where it's hidden, but they believe she knows." The leader felt his stomach twist. This was bigger than he had imagined. The Syndicate wasn't just after the girl. They were after global power, control. "And you've been chasing her for months because of this code?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief. The man nodded, his face pale. "Yes. The Syndicate believes she's been carrying it all along, but she doesn't know how to access it. They think that once they have her, they can force her to lead them to it." The leader clenched, his fists, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. He turned to his crew, his eyes hard. They won't get away with this. Not on my watch. Diesel, standing nearby, grunted in agreement. We'll make sure they don't. But we need to act fast. The Syndicate doesn't play around. If they're after her this badly, they'll be making their move soon. The leader nodded, his mind already running through the next steps. He turned to the girl, who had been standing quietly the whole time, absorbing everything. She looked scared, but there was something else in her eyes, something stronger than fear. We're not going to let them take you, he said, his voice soft but filled with conviction. You're safe now. She didn't say anything, but he saw the relief flicker in her eyes. The leader's heart swelled with determination. He couldn't let the Syndicate get their hands on her, or the code. He had no idea what kind of weapon they were talking about, but he knew one thing for sure. Whatever it was, it had to be stopped. Get ready, the leader said to his crew. We're heading to the Syndicate's hideout. It's time to end this. As they prepared to move out, the man who had been captured spoke again, his voice trembling. You have no idea what you're up against. The Syndicate has people everywhere. They'll come for you, and they'll come hard. The leader didn't flinch. Let them come, he said, his voice steady. We'll be ready. The bikers mounted their bikes, the sound of engines roaring to life filling the air. The girl climbed onto the leader's bike, holding on tightly to his back as they sped off into the night. As they made their way toward the Syndicate's hideout, the leader's thoughts raced. How had things gotten this out of control? They had started out trying to help a frightened girl, and now they were on the brink of stopping a global power struggle. He didn't know exactly where the Syndicate's hideout was, but he knew it had to be close. They had tracked the group this far, and they weren't going to stop until they had answers. The journey was long, but the leader couldn't afford to think about that. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The Syndicate wasn't just a gang, it was a network of power, influence, and control. And they had made the mistake of going after the wrong person. As they neared the hideout, the leader's eyes scanned the area, looking for signs of movement. The place was isolated, hidden deep in the woods, far from the reach of law enforcement. It was the perfect place to operate without drawing attention. But the leader wasn't going to let that stop him. He had come this far, and he wasn't backing down now. This is it, the leader said, his voice calm but filled with authority. We need to move fast. Take out anyone who gets in our way. The crew nodded in unison, their expressions hardening. The leader turned to the girl one last time before they moved in. Stay close, he said, his voice gentle but firm. We're almost there. She nodded, her grip tightening around him. The leader could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about protecting the girl anymore. This was about stopping an organization that could change the world for the worse. And he wasn't going to let that happen. They moved swiftly, the sound of their bikes cutting through the silence of the night. As they reached the hideout, the leader's heart pounded. He could feel the danger lurking in the shadows, but he also felt something else, determination. They were going to end this, no matter the cost. The Syndicate wouldn't get away with their plans. Not on his watch. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted metal walls reflecting the pale moonlight. The leader's heart pounded in his chest as he steered his bike closer, the roar of the engines reverberating through the quiet night. The crew moved in formation, tightly grouped together, as they approached the hidden stronghold of the Syndicate. The air was thick with tension. This was it. They had finally tracked the heart of the organization, and it was time to confront the men who had been pulling the strings. The leader's mind was focused, but his thoughts flickered briefly to the girl behind him. She had been through so much already, and now they were about to face the most dangerous part of the mission. He glanced back at her, her face pale but determined, her grip tight around him. He had promised to protect her, and no matter what happened, he would keep that promise. Stay close, he said softly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. She nodded silently, her eyes fixed ahead. The crew pulled up to the edge of the warehouse, their bikes falling silent one by one. The leader dismounted and motioned for the others to follow. Diesel was the first to speak, his deep voice cutting through the silence. You think they're expecting us? The leader scanned the darkened windows of the warehouse, trying to read the situation. They know we're here, he said, his tone low. But that doesn't matter. We're going in anyway. The bikers nodded, their faces hardening with resolve. They had come this far, and they weren't turning back now. The group moved quickly but cautiously, positioning themselves around the building. The leader checked his weapons, making sure everything was in place. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The Syndicate was dangerous, and if they had even the slightest edge, they wouldn't hesitate to take advantage of it. As they approached the front door, the leader motioned for everyone to hold. He wanted to make sure they were ready before storming in. "We move fast," he said. "Stick together. Take out anyone who tries to stop us." His crew nodded again, and with that, the leader moved toward the door. Without hesitation, he kicked it open, and the bikers flooded into the warehouse, their boots pounding against the concrete floor. Inside, the space was vast and filled with shadows. The dim light from a few hanging bulbs cast eerie, elongated shapes on the walls, and the sound of footsteps echoed through the cavernous room. The leader's eyes darted around, scanning every corner. There were a few crates stacked high against the walls, and several large machines that looked like they had been abandoned long ago. But it wasn't the room itself that held the leader's attention. It was the figures moving in the shadows. He could hear hushed voices, a couple of muffled thuds as if someone had been moving. He gestured to Diesel, who immediately moved into position on one side of the room, while the leader and the others took their positions. They were closing in on something big. "They're here," the leader whispered into the comms. "Stay alert." The sound of a door creaking open interrupted the stillness. The leader motioned for the crew to stop. The door was located at the far end of the warehouse, and it was slowly opening. A few figures emerged from the darkness. The leader's heart rate spiked. They were wearing the same distinctive jackets, the emblem of the Syndicate emblazoned on their backs. The leader stepped forward, his boots making a solid thud on the concrete. "We've got company," he said, his voice hard. "Don't let them get away." The figures froze when they saw the bikers, their faces shifting from surprise to cold calculation. "You think you can just walk in here and take us down?" One of the men sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. The leader didn't respond. His eyes locked on the man, and he felt a sense of cold determination wash over him. "I'm not here to talk," he said. "I'm here to end this." The fight broke out in an instant. The leader moved swiftly, his fist connecting with the man's jaw, sending him stumbling back. Chaos erupted as the bikers engaged with the Syndicate members. The sound of fists hitting flesh, the clash of boots against concrete, and the roars of the motorcycles filled the air. The leader fought like a man possessed, his focus entirely on taking down the people who had been chasing the girl for so long. He could hear the girl's footsteps behind him, but he didn't take his eyes off his target. As the skirmish raged on, Diesel's deep voice cut through the noise. "We need to get to the back," he shouted. "The main room's there. They're hiding something." The leader's mind clicked into action. "Move," he commanded. The bikers quickly regrouped, pushing toward the back of the warehouse. The Syndicate members who were still standing tried to block them, but they were no match for the bikers' coordinated attack. The leader cleared a path and reached the back door. He kicked it open with one swift motion, and what he saw inside made his blood run cold. The room was filled with computers, large monitors displaying streams of data, and several high-tech devices that looked far more advanced than anything he had ever seen. At the center of the room was a large metal chest, locked and chained. The leader's eyes widened. This was it. This was what they had been after all along. That's what they wanted, the girl whispered, her voice shaking. "The weapon." The leader turned to face her, his resolve hardening. "We're not leaving here without it," he said. "And we're not leaving here without you." They had come this far. And now, they were going to take down the Syndicate once and for all. The room was thick with tension, the air heavy as the bikers stood at the threshold of the tech-filled space. The leader's eyes scanned the high-tech equipment, his mind racing. He had expected this. The Syndicate was no ordinary criminal group. But the sheer scale of what they had been working on, the technology and the weapon in front of them, was far beyond what he could have imagined. The chest in the center of the room was locked and chained, clearly the most valuable piece of the puzzle. He could feel the girl standing behind him, her presence a reminder of why they were here. "We need to destroy this," the leader said firmly, his voice filled with authority. "Whatever it is, it can't be allowed to fall into their hands." The crew nodded in agreement, but there was a lingering uncertainty in the air. They didn't know exactly what the Syndicate had been planning with this weapon, but it was clear that it had the potential to do massive damage. As the leader moved closer to the chest, his heart began to pound. Diesel, who had been by his side the whole time, reached into his bag and pulled out a set of tools. "We'll get this open," he said, his voice low but steady. The leader nodded and stepped back, keeping a vigilant watch over the room. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him. They had come so far to protect this girl, but now, standing at the heart of the Syndicate's operation, he realized how much was at stake. "What's inside?" the girl asked quietly, her voice trembling slightly. The leader turned to her, his expression softening. "We don't know yet," he replied. "But we're going to make sure it's not used against you." Diesel worked quickly, his hands moving with practiced precision as he cut through the chains holding the chest closed. The tension in the room grew with every passing second, as if the whole building was holding its breath. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Diesel stepped back, his hands wiping sweat from his brow. "It's open," he said, his voice grim. The leader stepped forward, the girl staying close behind him. As he lifted the lid of the chest, a soft hum filled the room, and his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a sleek, metallic device, smaller than he had expected, but its design was unlike anything he had ever seen. It looked almost alien, a mix of wires, circuits, and glowing lights. The leader's heart raced as he stared at the device. "This is it," he muttered. "This is what they've been after." The girl's eyes widened as she stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the device. "What does it do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The leader hesitated, his mind running through the possibilities. "I don't know yet," he said, "but we're going to find out." He reached out to touch it, but before his fingers made contact, a voice echoed from behind them. "You really think you can just walk in here and take it?" The leader spun around, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. A man stepped into the room from the shadows, his face cold and calculating. He was tall, with sharp features, and wore a dark suit that contrasted with the gritty surroundings. The leader's blood ran cold as he recognized the man. "You're the one pulling the strings," the leader said, his voice steely. The man smiled darkly. "I'm the one who has the power. And now, you've made a grave mistake coming here." The leader's eyes narrowed, and his grip tightened around the handle of his weapon. "We didn't come here to play games," he said. "We came here to stop you." The man chuckled, taking a step forward. "You think you can stop the Syndicate? You have no idea who you're dealing with." The leader's gaze was unflinching. "I've dealt with worse than you," he said. "And I'm not leaving until this ends." The man's smile faded, replaced with a cold, deadly expression. "You have no idea what's at stake," he said. "If you think you can just destroy everything we've worked for, you're wrong. You'll regret this." The leader stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the man. "We're not leaving until this is over. If you think you can scare us off, you're mistaken." The man's face twisted with rage, and for a moment, the room seemed to crackle with tension. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, the man lunged for the device. The leader reacted instinctively, pulling his weapon and aiming it at the man. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice filled with authority. The man hesitated, his fingers hovering just inches from the device. The tension in the room was unbearable. The girl, who had been standing silently behind the leader, stepped forward. "Stop," she shouted, her voice shaking but full of resolve. The leader turned to her, surprised by the strength in her voice. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice softer now. "I know what it is," she said, looking directly at the man. "I know what it does." The man's eyes flickered with interest. "You know?" he asked, his voice colder than before. The girl nodded, her expression serious. "It's not a weapon," she said quietly. "It's a key." The leader frowned, his mind racing as he processed her words. "A key to what?" he asked. The girl looked at the device, her face filled with both fear and understanding. "A key to everything. To all the control they want." The man stepped back, his expression darkening. "You don't know what you're talking about," he spat. "You're just a pawn." The girl's gaze hardened. "Not anymore." The leader's eyes flicked between the girl and the man, a new understanding settling over him. The Syndicate wasn't just trying to control power, they were trying to control everything. And they had just found the key to doing so. The room was still, the air thick with the weight of the moment. The leader stared at the girl, his mind racing to process her words. A key to everything. The girl's voice had broken through the chaos, cutting through the tension like a blade. For a second, the man who had been so sure of himself faltered, his eyes narrowing in confusion. "What do you mean by that?" he spat, the venom in his voice still evident, but now laced with uncertainty. The girl stood her ground, her back straight, eyes unflinching. This device, it doesn't control power. It's a map, a blueprint. It shows where all of the Syndicate's control points are, all their assets, and how they operate. The leader's breath caught. A map? He asked, his voice quiet, calculating. The girl nodded. Yes. Whoever controls it can find and seize everything they've built. Businesses, weapons, entire systems. This isn't just some weapon. It's the foundation of their entire empire. The man who had been threatening them looked like he was ready to explode, his fist clenching. You don't know what you're talking about, he snarled. You think you can just take this and walk away? The Syndicate is far more powerful than you'll ever understand. The leader stepped forward, his hand still firm on his weapon. The Syndicate is nothing compared to what's coming for them, he said, his voice low and cold. You've made your move, and now, it's over. For a moment, the man seemed to reconsider, the arrogance in his face replaced by doubt. But before he could speak, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed in the distance, bringing a new wave of urgency. We need to move. Now, Diesel's voice rang out, his tone laced with concern. The leader didn't hesitate. Everyone, get ready. We're finishing this. The bikers quickly gathered their things and prepared for what was about to unfold. The leader turned to the girl one last time, his voice softer but no less determined. You're safe now. We're not letting anyone use you or this key. She looked up at him, her face a mix of fear and relief. Thank you, she whispered, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I never thought I would be free of them. The leader gave her a small, reassuring smile. You are now. The bikers moved swiftly, heading for the exit. They had the key, they had the girl, and they had one last thing to do, finish what they had started. As they made their way out of the warehouse, the leader couldn't shake the feeling that the battle wasn't over. This was just the beginning. The Syndicate wouldn't go down without a fight, and they would come after the girl and the key with everything they had. But that was a fight the leader was prepared to take on. The bikers gathered outside, their engines roaring to life once more. The leader mounted his bike, the girl sitting behind him, her grip firm around his waist. Diesel and the others took their positions, ready for whatever came next. The leader looked at the road ahead, the open highway stretching out before them, a symbol of the freedom they had just won. But as they drove off into the night, the leader knew they weren't truly free. Not yet. The Syndicate was still out there, and they would come after them, hard. But the bikers had made it this far, and they weren't backing down. The girl had trusted them, and they had promised to protect her. That promise still stood. The wind whipped past them as they sped down the road, the sound of their engines loud in the night. The leader looked ahead, his resolve hardening. They were going to take down the Syndicate, and when it was over, they would make sure the world would never forget the cost of crossing the line. As the miles passed and the night deepened, the leader's thoughts were clear. They would find the Syndicate, and they would take them down, piece by piece, until the empire they had built was nothing but ash. The fight wasn't over, but it was closer to being won than ever before. In this thrilling Hell Angels story series, you will dive deep into the intense journey of a group of bikers who risk everything to protect a young girl being pursued by a dangerous underground organization. As they uncover dark secrets, including a mysterious device that could shift global power, they find themselves up against the full force of the Syndicate. With every twist and turn, the bikers must confront their worst fears and make sacrifices to keep the girl safe. The Hell Angels stories take you through adrenaline-pumping action, emotional moments, and a battle for survival. With each chapter, the stakes get higher as the bikers unravel the true meaning behind the girl's importance. These Hell Angels stories will keep you on the edge of your seat as they fight to protect the girl and destroy the Syndicate's sinister plans. Join them on their dangerous mission and experience the raw emotions and thrilling action that make these Hell Angels stories unforgettable.